Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets. Anytime a movie like this comes out, I'm, supposed to praise its amazing original vision and how it's going to be a cult movie in 10 years. And it's so great that directors are able to do exactly what they want and sort of auteur theory jerk-off kind of things about how this movie is so amazing and awe-inspiring and all that stuff. This movie is visually amazing and awe-inspiring. You should definitely see it in the theater. I actually spent money to see this in 3D, and it didn't disappoint. I really loved how visually eye-popping it was. There's no movie that looks this beautiful on the big screen this summer, no doubt about it. But what we tend to do with Jupiter Ascending, with Sucker Punch, with any big blockbuster movie where a studio's like, let's let this guy do whatever he wants, although this isn't the same because he independently funded it, but whatever, and he's like the head of the studio too. But when you have these directors, I guess, just having endless amounts of money to make these crazy, insane, big budget movies that you know the movie-going public is not going to go for, you kind of want to say, this is going to be a cult movie and you should really praise this kind of vision because this sort of thing doesn't come along all the time. And I am sort of in that camp. If Valerian was on HBO or something, I'd probably watch it, but I'm not going to sit here and act like this is the next fucking Labyrinth or Speed Racer. In the case of those films, they're both movies that, sure, they're not exactly perfect, but their weaknesses aren't as strong as they are in Valerian. Valerian has a lot going for it, probably stronger than most movies do, but the weird casting and odd performances and a story that honestly doesn't really work as well as they probably would like to pretend it doesn't help this movie at all. I'm not saying this is too weird and difficult for audiences to take or something because it's too smart and cerebral and they're used to prepackaged stuff and things that they already know. I saw this movie in New York, so half the audience was fucking French, and to them, this was a famous IP. This is based on a comic book called Valerian and Lurline or something. Anyway, it's supposed to be about Valerian, who's Dane DeHaan's character, and Cara Delevingne. It's supposed to be named that, but they chose not to do that. I don't know why. But it's based on a French comic book, which I'm assuming is fairly well known enough that people knew what it was in France, even though he made it in English because he felt it would get a wider audience. To those people, it's probably different than all these American critics saying like how this is an entirely original vision and isn't this different in a summer of remakes, reboots, and sequels and all those things. To us, surely, it's still an original enough of a vision that, yes, it does actually very much stand out. This does feel like you see too many blockbusters. The whole thing of like, you see a Marvel movie, you expect that kind of special effects, unless it's like Guardians of the Galaxy or something. You expect certain plot moves, you expect certain action sequences to do certain things, and Valerian doesn't do that at all. Valerian is literally in its own galaxy and very much plays within that. There's tons and tons of different aliens. Luc Besson does not hold back on the different kinds of creatures throughout this. They're all weird, different looking. It looks totally original in comparison to most of stuff that's going on in Hollywood. But I think ultimately when we talk about films like Labyrinth or Speed Racer or any of these big expensive movies that didn't do well and then later we appreciate them as classics, or Blade Runner or something, when I talk about at least Labyrinth and Blade Runner, the storytelling is actually pretty solid, or solid enough that I'm not sitting there questioning it or getting as bored as I was, even though I was getting dazzled by the visual effects. And that's Valerian's biggest problem, is Luc Besson's great at an action sequence, and in a way this is probably the better version of a Jupiter Ascending kind of a thing, because you're going from action sequence set piece to action sequence set piece so quickly that even though you're pretty sure that their relationship that's supposed to be the romance throughout it is not the strongest and the dialogue's not entirely working and there are various problems with it, you're kind of just cool with it because you're having such a good time. I think the first action sequence, I guess, with the characters at least, they go to the city where their holographically gets projected into the city because it's so dangerous, so you just see these people walking around a desert, but then if you put on these glasses you can see this whole other city that you're transported to, and they have to do an action sequence within that, which was like really cool. And probably I think one of the interesting things about this film is the first half of it, each of the sequences were cooler, and then as they got to the city of 1,000 planets, it got less and less. They had things where it was breaking through walls, and each wall was like a different world that lives in this huge space station that came to every vulture had people who lived there and had different things like aliens that lived underwater, robot alien things, like all sorts of different worlds. And you see him break through each of these walls and he goes through each different thing, and it's really, really cool looking, really beautiful, really gorgeous looking, all the design and effort that went into that. And there's oftentimes, and I think what is often said about this movie in comparison to, we have all these big blockbusters blockbuster movies, and we see these long lists of set designers and special effects people all the time, and usually we're like, yeah, I guess it does take that many people to make a movie, but I don't really see it. I'm not really awe-inspired anymore. It might look really cool to them, and it does look really cool, but we see so much of like the same thing, it's not that interesting. And this, all of the budget is on the screen. Like, yes, this costs over $200 million. It was the most expensive film by a French production company, even though it's not a French movie, ever made. It's one of the biggest budgeted independent films ever made. It's ridiculous, but you can see it all on screen, and that's kind of a fun thing to see as an audience at a time when you have shrinking budgets, and the whole idea of kind of calming things down and making it more relatable to something like Spider-Man Homecoming, which was great, but it's interesting to see someone go the batshit crazy other direction, where it's like, you're gonna destroy cities, fuck that, we're gonna be in a place of 1,000 planets. So fuck you. And it's gonna be crazy, and you're not gonna know what to do with it. And frankly, I don't. I mean, I think I could watch this movie a couple times and pick out another interesting alien character to get into or something, and they really have a lot of fun with it. Luc Besson has a lot of fun with even how he casted it, from Rutger Hauer to John Goodman being in it for one sequence to voice the character, to Rihanna having a lot of fun in this shape-shifting alien thing, who seemingly is just Rihanna in a bunch of different outfits. But that was cool too. I think it seemed like she had a lot of fun with that. Probably her best performance I've seen from her in a movie. Herbie Hancock is in this, which I love. This is clearly the apex of Luc Besson. This is the peak. If Valerian is successful, which it won't be, I know it won't. It's not like this movie's gonna explode. No, maybe overseas. Maybe we'll get a Valerian 2. I know he's written 2 and is working on the script for 3. Not because anyone asked him to. Just because he's bored, I think. He's so into this, and he so loves it, and I haven't seen a director, as we're moving away from auteurism in certain ways, and that's always a discussion, the director being in control and seeing these directors almost for hire and things. I haven't seen a director fucking love a property like this in a while. Like, he has so much love for these characters and this world, and showing it off to you, and all the amazingness of it. It's really wonderful to watch. If you want to see this movie, if you have like an inkling, like, yeah, I would like to see that. If you're not seeing it on the big screen, or you have a really, really big TV, then don't see it any other way, because this really needs it. I saw Jupiter Ascending on a huge screen just because I was like, look, there's a lot of effort that went into this disaster. I want to see all of it. And Valerian is the same way. Except Valerian, I think, is a little more memorable in some ways, in other ways it's not. I honestly had to keep thinking about it to remember it in certain regards, because some of the plot wasn't that interesting. Story-wise, it was like, oh, I mean, I guess. It felt like most French kind of pulpy animated films I've seen, or, comic books in ways, but he seems to kind of want to have it both ways, where he wishes that Dane DeHaan was a bigger movie star like Bruce Willis was in The Fifth Element, and having that to kind of work for him, but it doesn't entirely get there. I think Cara Delevingne actually gives one of her best performances I've seen from her in the 2 movies I've seen her in. She had a lot of screen presence. She really got the kind of pulpy, kind of European action movie kind of a thing, Tintin inspired sort of thing, that she was really good at that. Dane DeHaan, a lot of people say this film required a Han Solo, not Dane DeHaan kind of underplaying and acting too cool for school. And I agree, he kind of brings the wrong sort of performance for this. It didn't bother me as much when I was watching it. When I realized I was thinking more about her than him, and it's not that he needs to overshadow her, but he needed to bring more of a comparable thing so they could play off of each other better. I think she does a good enough job that it kind of like helps his performance, which is weird because I thought Dane DeHaan was a pretty strong actor, but he kind of flubs it up. But doing these kind of films are different from the kind of productions that he is more used to, more small scale, although he did do A Cure for Wellness. I do like that Dane DeHaan's done 2 very auteur-centric, disaster, very expensive blockbuster movies in a row. So you have a terrible agent, Dane DeHaan, but I fucking love it. I sort of love that A Cure for Wellness and Valerian exists, and it's beautiful as a cinephile in a way that it's like, you believe they did this, that, and this thing. I love that Clive Owen's in this. I love that so much about that it exists, but it is kind of like that cinephile little pleasure of a film where you're just like, whoa, they made a crazy stupid movie like this, I gotta see it, because I see movies all the time and this is at least different. And how different it is why you'd want to see it, but how it fails to really make that different a thing of amazing classic that I'd want to talk about in 10 years, or a cult movie that people would watch at midnight for reasons beyond, just that it's different. It doesn't really excel at the way it really should. It just kind of feels like a lot of these like big blockbuster auteur things where it just kind of falls apart, frankly, because it's just too kind of up its own ass in a lot of ways, and it doesn't fully understand how to kind of have the right story for its leads and its characters and its action sequences to really get into that. This whole thing with this planet that explodes, it's an interesting idea. They don't really fully get into it in a way that I thought was memorable or made a point where I was like, oh shit, that really made me think. It made me think this movie's expensive and beautiful, but so did like the first frame and the trailers. So I don't necessarily think the story is the thing that you're going to be thinking about. But special effects wise and how beautiful the sets and everything like that, I fucking love this movie in that regard. You're seeing this to see the disaster that it is. It's just like the reason you'd see Jupiter Ascending. Wachowskis have made a lot of crazy, but Luc Besson, he hasn't fully followed up The Fifth Element. I like The Fifth Element, but I think The Fifth Element casting wise was the key, and this film just didn't cast in the right way. Casting is really important. Like, that is one of the reasons that Marvel is so successful. They have personalities that you want to watch through multiple movies. I don't really feel that way with these two leads, but I kind of love that this film exists. Valerian has this just whole crazy sci-fi world in a way that I feel like, yes, it is a failed big budget blockbuster movie that you'll go, what the fuck were they thinking? But in some ways I really enjoyed it in the guise of that. You can tell that even if I hadn't read behind the scenes things, you can be like, oh, I don't read that kind of stuff, so I don't need to judge a movie like that. That's great that you're uninformed, so therefore intelligent. But I think with Valerian, you can tell all that's on screen. You can tell how beautiful and wonderful it is and how amazing the craft is that goes behind it. You don't get films like this. You don't have films that I actually wanted to see in 3D and wanted to see in bigger, large format theaters if other movies hadn't taken that away from it, really. I wish Valerian came out on a weekend where it had it all to itself, even though, it was going to bomb anyway. You could have just put it out on Labor Day or something. I like this film. I reviewed the film Time Masters recently. It reminds me of that, and I like those kind of worlds and seeing all these kind of aliens, that kind of heavy metal magazine kind of mentality of having all these crazy things going on and going on so far in the future that we're interacting with tons of aliens and having a space station. The whole idea of the whole City of 1,000 Planets thing was like really interesting, and like thinking of like all the worlds and the interactions and the political ramifications they have in this was actually interesting. It was just the people who got me through that story didn't entirely work. The story wasn't as well done and as interesting overall as maybe it should have been, but I think Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets is the kind of unique summer movie. When it comes on in 20 years, you'll maybe sit down and watch it and go, wow, this happened, and oh cool, look at the effects on that and stuff like that, but it's not going to be the immediate cult movie classic. It'll just be a unique little cinephile find that you'll just kind of wonder at and go like, holy shit, that actually happened, but you'll still admit afterwards that you probably don't ever really need to see it again or think about it again, and you'd much rather watch The Fifth Element. It's just kind of like his big sci-fi follow-up to that we've been waiting for all this time, and we finally got it, and they sort of bungled it up, but at least special effects wise they lived up to all the promise that Fifth Element showed from Luc Besson, and that's a cool world to be in. Maybe they'll never let him go hog wild on something like Star Wars, but at least we get to wonder at Valerian and think of all the crazy worlds and awe at all the cool costumes and special effects and cool action sequences. Even if it doesn't entirely work, that's fine, because I think if you're watching a film like this, you sort of know it's not going to work, and you can kind of just sit back, relax, and watch all these crazy visuals going on, watch all this crazy stuff, watch a director just go all out and potentially destroying his career in studio to make a dream project that feels like auteurism run amok in the craziest ways. But sometimes it's just fun to watch that and wait for next year for someone to do another one and say, how come you should support this, to support interesting, different science fiction films. But it's still fun to kind of watch these disasters happen when they do, and Valerian is a disaster to sit back and wonder at, probably more so than I've seen from the other sci-fi big budget disasters than we've seen in recent memory. It is one that you should check out on the big screen to see it, because you'll never get a chance to see it again, and most likely no one will remember it enough to play it in a revival house to give you that chance. So you should probably go out and see it, because this is as different and original as it is something that'll probably be forgotten and just remembered for the kind of unique cinematic vision that it is. That's kind of all it is, but it's so all in that it's just a fun thing to watch. So if you have seen Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets and you'd like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.